is Regional Director with Metrostudy. She has been a local real estate professional for over 16 years, going through home building as a sales director, and then head of land acquisition and development for major home builders, and then more recently before Metrostudy, she was a senior manager at John Burns Real Estate Consulting, where she conducted feasibility studies and things of the sort. So today we're going to hear all about new construction in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Please, everybody, help me welcome Paige Shipp.
Thank you, sir. Oh yeah, I do need that actually. Yeah. Thanks everyone, I appreciate being here. This is also one of my favorite events because I love hearing from all of you about what you're seeing in the market as well, because you guys are on the front lines. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to do an economic overview, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the apartment market, a little bit about resale since I'm preaching to the choir, and then get into new homes. So let's get started. So in talking about kind of what's going on in the market, so if somebody had told me we'd be at 130,000 jobs, there's no way that I would have believed them 2 years ago. We are at 130,000 jobs in DFW for the past 12 months. Keep in mind that when you hear about these job announcements, right, everybody wants to know, when are those actually posted? When do those count? Those don't count until somebody has themselves in the seat, okay? So all of these jobs that are happening in Toyota, so as we all have heard, they're moving in about 250 per week starting about 4 weeks ago. Those jobs aren't in this number, okay? So this number actually reflects everything that's happened up until now. So a couple of things that I want to show you with these numbers. One, we are actually, this includes both Fort Worth and Dallas. So in Dallas, that includes Dallas, Plano, Irving, and Fort Worth is Fort Worth, Arlington. The importance of that is a couple things. One, all of these things that are happening in Irving and Plano are counted towards Dallas, right? So that's where all the jobs are. And what we've seen probably about the past 3 or 4 years is a bifurcation in growth between Dallas and Fort Worth. And by that, typically we've seen jobs, about 65% of them are in Dallas, and about 35% are in Fort Worth. Over the past couple of years, it's been as different as 8% in Fort Worth and 92% in Dallas. We're getting back to the kind of the new normal, and it's still not quite there yet, but we're at about 22% of jobs are occurring in Fort Worth, and the rest of those are in Dallas. You know, so the reason for that bifurcation, one was energy, and the other one was really because there was just a lot more growth occurring on the east side than there was on the west side. So the other thing we like to see, especially when you're looking at job growth, is a lot of jobs happening amongst many sectors, okay? So historically, we've always done very well for trade, transportation, utility. We're in the center of the U.S. People like to use us in the middle of the world, right? But what we like to see is information, financial, and professional services. Why? Those are the high income. For the first time in about 3 years, professional services has actually outpaced trade, transportation, and utilities in Dallas-Fort Worth, and that's because of all of these job relocations we're having, so that's great news. The other part that we like to see is low unemployment, of course. Well, why do we want to see that? During this cycle, the one thing that has been very, very absent has been wage growth. Okay, so we've had lots of jobs, we've had lots of people coming here, they're just not making a lot more money than they did 10 years ago. What happens when we've got low unemployment, so most economists believe that full employment is somewhere between 4.5% and 5%. We're below full employment. So that means two things. One, we're having to steal employees from each other. What happens when you steal an employee from somebody else? Yep, you got to pay them more, right? They're not going to leave just for the sake of leaving. And the other thing that happens is we can't find enough people in DFW to fill these jobs, so we're bringing them in for other parts of the country. That's also a good thing, because when they come to DFW, they think our housing is a steal, and they either buy more expensive homes or they buy new homes, which is always good for me. And then the other thing, so again, I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit here as far as interest rates, but one thing that we saw, so home builders have been very nervous. What happens when interest rates go up? What happens when interest rates go up? And what we saw, at least on our side of the industry, was that when they went up, kind of had that big uptick after the election, that it did not necessarily scare off the buyers. What it really did was force some of our fence sitters to say, you know what, we better go ahead and purchase now. The other thing that we saw in the field was we saw a lot of buyers who were choosing just to buy either a little bit less home or even more so, less options. So the good part is we really didn't see it scaring off buyers, so we're hopeful that that's going to continue as interest rates go up, because we do believe they will be going up. All right, and this is my very favorite slide so far. My other favorite slide used to be the next one, but this is my favorite slide. So look at where we are. We are #1 by absolute job growth in the nation. We have beat out New York City for absolute job growth. That is fantastic. Look at how much larger the employment is, total employment is for New York. Isn't that amazing? So we're at 3.8% annual job growth. The only other ones that rival us are San Bernardino and Atlanta. This is pretty fantastic. When you look at where our friends are to the south, you can see that Austin added about 30,000 jobs. Houston added about 30,000 as well, and San Antonio about 24. So still very, very, very healthy. Houston's getting closer and closer into that black, so we're glad to see the increase in employment down there. So this used to be my favorite slide, still kind of is, but we are still number one as far as the new home starts. So we are at 30,018 starts. I had to beg, borrow, and steal to get those 18 starts. But we are above 30,000, and we are still number one. When you look at number two, Houston, so they are kind of starting to lose less starts, I guess is the best way to put it. But I still foresee that we're going to be the number one new home market, probably for the next couple of years at least. I expect that within the top five, especially 3, 4, and 5, they'll start to change positions. But beyond that, I expect that really we're pretty much going to stay between Atlanta, Central Florida, and Phoenix, Tucson for being in those top 5. Austin, so they're up 21%, and that huge difference is affordability. They have figured out the affordability thing ahead of us, and I'll get into that a little bit. And then San Antonio, my counterpart in San Antonio says flat is the new up, so he's at about 10.5. Let's talk a little bit about multifamily. We're still seeing very strong growth in multifamily. It has tempered a little bit. So when you look at absorptions, I like to see units absorb because that means that they've come to market and somebody's actually moved into them. So last year, that number was at about 21,000. So it's a little bit less than where we used to be. We're still at a very, very high number of 14,000 units. What I'm hearing from the field is actually a little bit mixed. I'm hearing from some of the developers that they're definitely having tighter lending standards and things are getting a little bit more difficult, but then I'm hearing from my construction guys that they've been asked to bid more projects than they ever have before. So it's kind of an interesting situation. We're clearly seeing an overbuilding in some of the A markets, the uptowns and areas like that, where it's getting very, very competitive. But a lot of these developers cannot bring the B and C product to market fast enough. It's very, very high demand, again, because of affordability. And this just gives you an idea of where we are as far as the trajectory of rent increases. This is very similar to what we've seen on the new and resale side, but very much an upward. And it really started in 2010, and it pushed through 2016. And then again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm going to tell you kind of the way I look at these numbers. So we're at 21,000 so far for the first 3 months of the year. The interesting part, as you all probably know, is we broke 100,000 resales or MLS sales last year. It doesn't look like we're going to beat that this year. Obviously, if you prorate this over the year, you're looking at about 80,000 sales. Median price of $235, obviously very high, but that's very different than what we're seeing in new. So our median price on new is $315. What I believe is that we're going to be continuing to increase this resale price until we get that delta between resale and new a little bit closer. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but we've had a lot of downward pressure on that new price, and I don't think we're going to see that price appreciation on the new side like I still think we're going to see on the resale side. And then this just gives you an idea. I'll kind of flip through. I have a couple slides here that kind of get into the weeds a little bit. But again, I always like to see what's happening as far as kind of year over year. So clearly we are very similar for January and February and off the charts in March. So it'll be interesting to see how we play out the rest of the year. And the other part, I always like to show this. So obviously, you can see that the bulk of our demand, this is where our sales are, right? The bulk of our demand is clearly below $300,000, right? So that's really driving that $235,000 price point. I've done the math on it, and 84% of resale homes are below $400,000, which is pretty shocking when you start to realize kind of where we're putting our new homes versus where the true demand is based on our resale activity. And then the other thing I'm very, very aware of, and especially when you're looking at the new side, is really how it's broken out. So again, as you all know, 6 months is equilibrium, and we're at 2.1 months of supply currently. But you can see that all of that's being drugged down by these lower price points. And what I'm really watching is not just the numbers that are happening in the quarter, but I want to see what's happening by trend. And by trend, you can see that these numbers are increasing quarter over quarter. So we're getting lower as far as our month supply in the lower price points and higher in the month supply of the higher price points. And then finally, what's really interesting is we're finally beginning to get our share. So this actually goes back to 2005, and you can see that at that point, 26% of all sales in DFW were new, and the 68% were resale. At that point, 65% of all new home starts were below 200,000. You know what that number is today? 8%. 65 to 8, so the market has changed dramatically. So that's why we've lost all this market share. Obviously, this happened during the downturn, but we're finally getting a little bit more market share, and that's happening because of these kind of secondary and tertiary markets, so I'll kind of talk through that all with you in a little bit. But we're starting to kind of try to figure out that affordability equation. So let's talk about my favorite subject, new homes. So you can see here, as I'd mentioned before, we're at 30,018. Which is really not much of an uptick. So this is what has happened. So in the end of the third quarter, all of fourth quarter last year, new home sales, not good. Not good. Home builders were not happy. Everybody was getting very, very concerned about what was happening in the market. All of my builders that I talk to, they say my third quarter closings are going to be dismal because I had a terrible backlog and terrible sales in the fourth quarter. January was okay. February, March, much better. Everybody's like, okay, fantastic. Things are back. And then April and May, not so much. So the best thing that I can say is that inconsistent is the new normal in new home sales in DFW. We can't really point to any one particular submarket, any one particular price point, any one particular buyer. It's just all over the board. There are some consistencies in that if you've pushed prices too hard and too fast, you're being kind of shut off. If you're too far north and you've got a lot of other new communities that are coming online below you, you're being cut off. If you're far west and you're affordable, if you're in the Fort Worth area, you're doing all right. So it's just kind of all over the map right now. The interesting thing to note, starts were up only about 3 or 4% year over year, but my closings were up 16%. What does that tell me? That tells me that although labor is a pain, labor is tough, we are figuring it out. Somehow we close 16% more homes now than we did a year ago. So although everybody tells you that labor is an issue, which it is, trust me, we are still figuring out how to build and close these homes much better than we had a year ago. This just gives you a sense. So you can see that in the first quarter of last year, we had, so this is first quarter 2016, this is 2017. We had a huge jump, you can see, between 2015 and 2016, very, very, very flat. So we just did not have that huge kind of 2016 sales year that we had this year. So this is the other interesting part. Now I know I'm again speaking to the choir. I know you guys are very familiar with all these communities, but what does this mean for you? So what we're seeing is a couple of things. So, you know, Westridge has been #1 for a very long time, and they're continuing to do so. Great location. Craig Ranch is moving up. They finally have some supply that they're selling through. They're doing smaller lots, getting a little bit affordable, I say with air quotes. You know, we've got Phillips Creek Ranch, obviously very high demand. The ones that I find are interesting are a couple of them. One, West Fork Ranch. That's the first time they've made our list. Again, kind of the Fort Worth coming to market. Harvest, last quarter, #10. Now they're #5. So they're starting to figure out that affordability issue. The other part, Light Farms, they were #4. Now they're #8. They have seen a very, very, very strong slowdown because they've been cut off by all the communities to the south. And the fact that 380, crossing 380 is like playing Frogger doesn't help them either. So when I'm looking at my builder market, so of course I always say that my buddies at D.R. Horton are taking over the world one house at a time. And you know, when I'm looking at this, there's a couple things I'm looking at. I'm always looking to see what it looks like for starts versus closings. So when my starts are very much outweighing my closings, which is, let's say, First Texas, that means that they're expanding. When they're very similar, kind of in D.R. Horton, it means that they're pretty stagnant. And when my closings are outpacing my starts, that means that they're shrinking. So a couple of things to point out here. So as you all know, Horton's done a fantastic job with Express Homes. They are actually kind of phasing out their Emerald. Meritage is phasing out their high-end Monterey. Lennar is phasing out Village. So obviously you can see a trend here, right? They're all going more affordable. As you all know as well, the interesting part is that Horizon has gone away and they've all rolled it up into Highland now, much to the chagrin of a couple of developers out there, but that's what they decided to do. So we're seeing a real shift from all of these builders to really get into a more affordable zone. And what that looks like is going to be interesting over the next couple of years. One that's doing it really in earnest is Ashton Woods. So if you guys haven't looked at the Starlight product, go on to starlighthomes.com. I actually just walked it in Atlanta. It is fantastic product. It's the same prices as LGI and Express, but it's really, really cool. The issue is going to be they're going to have to figure out a way to get the cities to allow them to build it. It's actually good looking from the outside. It's just a little bit different. So it's going to be interesting to see how these cities adapt to this new affordability concept, which is, again, something else I'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to skip through this. So the other part that I'm really looking at is inventory. So there's a couple things with inventory that you want to be aware of. This is total inventory, which includes under construction, which is any home after it's been started. Finished vacant, which is the death of all home builders. That's the last thing you want, is a finished vacant home, because that means it's completed and nobody's living in it. And then models, which we all know what that is. So as you can see, my equilibrium here is about 6 months, and we're at about 7.4 months of supply. This doesn't concern me for a couple of reasons. One, we're on a downward trend, which is good. Two, we do have some labor issues that we're contending with. And then three, we're also building more expensive homes, so it's going to take longer. What I am a little bit concerned about, though, is where the inventory is building, right? So a couple quarters ago, these guys were all in the 7s and 8s. Now we're in the 8s and 9s. So we're starting to build up this inventory in the higher price points. And my guys that are kind of in the lower price points, it's starting to drop. The other part that I'm very, very aware of is finished vacant. This is on an upward trajectory. Again, 2 to 2.5 months is equilibrium. So we are within equilibrium. We are not outside of where we should be, but we are still increasing. And what scares me even more than that is these numbers up here that are increasing. These used to be 3-4 quarters ago, 1.9, 2.0. Every quarter they're increasing more and more and decreasing here is in the lower price points. Why is that important? That means we could get lopsided. We could have an oversupply in the higher price points and continue to have more and more of an undersupply where true demand is, which is below that 400,000. So let's talk about pricing. So what we do when we actually go and survey. So every quarter we send out about 25 to 30 people and we drive every single new home community, everything that's under construction and under development. So we not only do a census, we don't do a census, we do an actual survey of every single house. The other part we do with that is we actually pull price sheets. So the importance of that is I know the price of every single type of home that's being built throughout DFW, and I can track what's happening with those prices. Now this slide actually tells me what percentage of them actually increased in price. This is not how much, this is how many actually went from one price to a higher price. So the good news is here, so typically fourth quarter a little bit softer, first quarter it's a little bit stronger, so typically we have like an uptick, right? And last year it was pretty flat. This year we had an uptick, so we had an increase in the number of floor plans. But the bad news is that a couple of things. So past couple of years, again, quarterly, this is the good part, right? We're first, second quarter, we're about 9%. So this is actually how much they've appreciated in price. So you like to see in the first, second quarter, you're appreciating at a very high rate. Again, you can't push prices as much during the softer times. But the problem is that we don't come back up. And we're starting to go down. And the reason why, the couple of things that we're seeing, so we are starting to see, and we've probably seen it, I guess, for about 6 to 9 months, buyers really pushing back on prices. And I know you guys know it. They're not going to do it. They're not going to keep paying these exorbitant prices. The problem becomes the cost of land, the cost to build is still increasing. So right now, builders are in their offices trying to figure out a way not to take a margin hit. And it's been very, very tough, and it's going to be very difficult. The other thing that's very interesting is this follows very much behind what we're seeing in Austin. So Austin, I say, is about 18 months ahead of us. And right now, they're kind of in this range right here. So they're in kind of that 1% range. So we could get to the point that we are actually very, very stagnant, and gosh forbid we actually go into the negative where we start decreasing prices. We're actually doing our survey right now, and we've actually seen price decreases, as you guys may have as well, up in kind of the northern Frisco, Salinas market. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And this just kind of shows you, so again, I've talked about, you know, pricing power. So obviously you can't push prices as much by percentage range in the higher prices as you can in the lower prices. Keep in mind, 6% of 200,000 is about the same as 4% of 400,000, or excuse me, 3% of 400,000, but still get the idea that it's all about percentage, especially when you're looking at margin. And then also it tells you kind of where all this is happening. So we have our annual starts and annual closings. Our annual starts are in gray and our annual closings are in red. So you can see that we are getting more starts, but really the bulk of where our starts are occurring is between that 250 and call it 500,000. That 500 plus market is getting pretty stagnant, and of course we don't have enough houses in those lower price points. I'm gonna flip through these a little bit. So the other part of what we're seeing is we're definitely seeing some sort of a, call it rebounding of the lots. So vacant developed lot is one that is ready to be constructed on, where you can go ahead and build a house, right? So what we've seen is obviously we had a lot of lots kind of during the downturn, and we've been really since 2010 doing our darndest to get in front of the supply, and we haven't done a very good job of that. We're just starting to do that. So our lowest was about 18.6 months of supply, 20 to 24 months is equilibrium, but we're starting back on an upward trend. So now we're at 19.7 months of supply. And what that looks like, so again, I had talked to you about where our starts and lot deliveries are. So these are the starts. So we've got almost 8% of our starts, as I had said, are below 200,000. Look where our lots are below 200,000. None. We have 0 lots we're bringing to market under 200,000. You can see that we're pretty much even. So we're bringing about the same supply as there is demand, really between 200 and 400. But then when you get above 400, that's where we're starting to see an oversupply of lots. We're bringing too many lots to market to versus what demand is in those areas, or excuse me, in those price points. And then finally, this is what it's starting to look like. So again, very similar to my finished vacant. We're starting to see, I mean, this is really where the true demand is, kind of in that 200 to 400 range. And that's really where our lowest supply is. These numbers are starting to get out of whack. Again, I told you we're delivering way too many lots in above 500, and we're starting to see it in the numbers. 20 to 24 months is equilibrium, and we're 27 months. So those could start to build up, and you can start to see price decreases in those higher price points. And then finally, this is kind of the most interesting part, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about submarkets, then I'll open it up for questions. So what we do when we go and we drive streets, we're actually also looking at developments, everything that's under development, okay? So what I call excavated streets, they're literally cutting streets, is really kind of the first true phase of lots under development. This here shows about 31,000 lots under development. That sounds pretty good, right? 31,000 lots, we've got 30,000 starts a year. That means these lots are going to come to market probably in the next 12 months or so. The intriguing part of this is this number was 21,000 a year ago. So we've got 47% more lots under development today than we did even 12 months ago. So that could mean we could end up very, very lot heavy and supply heavy here pretty quickly. My number one concern is what is the price point of these lots? I don't have purview into that until they come to market as a new home. If these are all coming on and they're above 400,000, we could end up very top heavy very quickly. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about where we're seeing the development. So of course, our buddies Frisco, still doing very well. The interesting part is that North Fort Worth and Frisco typically were kind of competing to be number one, and North Fort Worth did used to have about 3,500 lots under development. They've been very, very, very difficult to work with. They have looked many of my developers straight in the eye and said, we don't need new homes. We don't need you. The other part that they do is they decide that they need to have 100% completion before they allow people to start building new homes, or allow developers and builders to start building new homes. The importance of that is that we really can't get ahead of it out there. So they're making it very difficult, and that's clearly apparent in the numbers. So where's everybody going? We're starting to see a lot more development in Denton County, Fate, which they weren't even on the list a year ago, Kaufman County, Midlothian, if I had a dime for every time I heard Midlothian, Forney, of course, Royce City, Waxahachie, Salina, and then finally the one that's not on here, but I can guarantee will be on here in 6 to 8 months is Van Alstyne. And when I hear Van Alstyne, I'm thinking, all right, my Uber driver owns 3 houses. It's time to get out of the market, right? But I mean, the market, I mean, I will tell you, they have great schools up there, but everybody is going north. And the reason why Van Alstyne and areas such as that concern me is because we've got so much development. I mean, just look at McKinney. I mean, you guys all know there's a lot of product on the market in McKinney. There's a lot of product on the market in Prosper. There's going to be a lot of product in the market in Salina. So you'd have to drive by all of those to get to Van Alstyne, and it has to be more affordable and have it make sense. And it costs the exact same amount to develop a lot in Van Alstyne as it does to develop a lot in Salina. So. And then this gives you an idea of where the actual VDL supplies are. So again, very interesting. You know, we're starting to see the Princetons of the world, Denton counties, Fate, Kaufman County, very, very, very low future supply. And a lot of that is because they've been working through their legacy lots. Why have they been successful selling on those legacy lots? Because they're cheap and they have cheap houses. When you start developing and building new lot, they're going to be just as expensive as the other lots that are happening in DFW. So we're kind of at an influx right now where it will be interesting to see the price of the new product that comes to market in these areas. And again, this just gives you an idea of starts versus closing. So we're seeing a lot in Fort Worth, Denton County, McKinney, Frisco. So again, our top markets, not surprising, but then you start seeing these other ones, the Salinas, the Kaufman counties, which haven't been quite as popular. And then the submarkets by finished vacant, and this is where I get a little bit nervous. So, you know, Salina, I mean, I've been Mustang Lakes, gorgeous community, selling the 50s, not selling the 60s. But what's the problem with that? The problem is that all these cities are requiring 50s, 60s, and 70s. They don't want just 50-foot lots. So we're having a real issue as developers trying to get a lot of these communities pushed through with that more affordable price product. Prosper, they have looked me straight in the eye and said, we are going to zone ourselves to Highland Park. So they are going to do their zoning and make their 80-foot lots so that everybody is going to have to buy an expensive home. I don't think that's going to work. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all happens. But then again, you've got the Denton counties, the McKinneys, so on and so forth. And then finally, when you look at the new home lot inventory, the lot inventory, again, we've got a lot of lots in Salina, but we've got very, very tight market in Kaufman County, still very tight in Frisco, very tight in Denton County, so on and so forth. So that gives you an idea of where we are in the market. Do you guys have any questions for me as I flew through all that data?
We have a microphone if anybody has any questions.
Either one.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, all these people 6 months, a year ago, all these people 6 months or a year ago were saying are going to be coming in, and all the different companies coming in. It's probably unfair, but do you have any idea of how many are already here and how many are yet to come?
Most of them are here. Most of them are here. Yep, most are here and most have purchased already. Yep, yep. And I will tell you, and that's another question I often get, which is what does the future look like as far as relocations? The feedback I'm getting, and again, I don't have any special insight or any special contacts or anything, but the feedback I'm getting is that what attracted Toyota here 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago when they were starting to look is changing, right? So the average home or new home sale price was probably, what, $75,000 lower than it was when they first got here. Traffic was very, very different than it is today. And then the talent pool. While it's still very strong, we have a lot more large employers that are trying to suck up that talent pool. So it's just a little bit different as far as when new companies come in to look at DFW. Yeah?
I have a lot of, hello?
Yes, I got you.
I have a lot of investors. They're being priced out of the market.
Yep.
Is there any area of the market where you can still buy a $300,000 or less investor home?
It's going to be tough. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just like anything else, right? I mean, it's you know, it's funny because I track those investment numbers as well, and I think that when they start kind of decreasing, it's a sign for the market that maybe we're starting to get to that point that there isn't that big delta, right, that we used to have between buying pre-owned and flipping and either flipping or holding, right? So it becomes a different plan, you know, and that's what a lot of these kind of nationwide single family for rent, you know, when they first came in the market, they were only buying cheap, and their idea was that they were going to sell once the market shifted. They've completely changed that concept. So they're now buying closer to retail, and they're holding. So it just becomes a different business model, I think, depending on the market. Yeah.
You had touched base earlier about how Austin was ahead of us as far as affordability market goes. Can you expand on that? The way you were talking about DFW coming and what to expect as far as...
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So all of you probably are familiar with Austin. So typically it's been north just like it is here. They started to really push in earnest south and east, right? So these are the Del Valley, you know, not really Pflugerville, but kind of the areas to the east that everybody said, don't go there, it's never going to happen, you're never going to sell a home over there. Well, they started building homes and people started buying. Why? It was closer to employment, it was closer to the price points that they needed to be in, okay? So they have actually brought product to market that is kind of in the less desirable areas. And so I think that that's where the next step is for us, right? I mean, how far can we push north when you still have south to go? And I know it's obviously still has a major stigma, but I think that once we kind of figure out that south and that southeast and southwest, we're going to start being able to really in earnest bring affordable and more homes to market than we are currently.
Will this be available to us?
Yeah, so what I'll do, Krista, where'd you go? Oh, sorry. So yeah, you can send, if you could PDF it, you have it. If you could just PDF it and just, if whomever requested, I don't want you posting it, but if you guys want it, I'm going to make them bombard you with.
Put an email address that you can reach out to us and we'll send it back to you in PDF format.
That'd be great. And I just ask that you don't post it on your Facebooks or Instagrams or anything like that. You can share with your clients. I just prefer not public sites. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
What's the outlook for new condominium construction?
Yeah, so I will say that condos, it's going to be tough. I've had this conversation, you know, Steve Brown actually called me about it, you know, a couple weeks ago about it, and I'm talking to a lot of developers from outside of DFW. We are not a condo market. You know, and you know, yes, I know they're doing great things up at Legacy, Museum Tower, but those aren't condos to me. I think that, you know, when you really start looking in earnest at, you know, high quality but more dense but still affordable product, it's a ways out for DFW. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, it's the cities. They don't understand it, they don't get it. And not only the people who are running the cities, but also the people that live in the cities are scared of it, obviously being NIMBY, not in my backyard. And then two, nobody here locally gets it. I've talked to a lot of my developers and my builders, and the only way that it will happen is if we have somebody from another part of the country that comes in and does it well and makes it make sense for other people. I just don't think it's going to be this cycle that we're going to see anything in earnest as far as the higher density condos. You know, we talk about micro units, I mean, all that stuff, that's not going to happen this cycle.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.